appeal of the short story for me as a practitioner is that it's a kind of working holiday, which is to say that when you're writing a novel, you're committed to the same story, the same characters for 2 years, 3 years. Whereas when you're writing a short story, you can maybe do it in 2-3 weeks. You have complete absorption of working on a miniature, but also you have the satisfaction, if you've managed to pull it off, of having set yourself a goal, which is a very focused, narrowed down goal, and you can do the very best you can to try and achieve it. And I think part of the appeal also of the short story is that whereas a novel has many advantages, and one of them is it can be discursive, it can be quite long, it's also quite cumbersome, as I say. And with a short story, you can focus on a small theme, on a motif, on a character study. You can actually have something which is contained. Whereas a short story, a novel tends to be a little baggy, and even the best writers, I think, struggle not to make it so in places. There's no room for bagginess in the short story. Every word has to tell. Now, this should be something that you strive for as a writer in all your work, but as I say, in a novel it's much harder to do. Paradoxically, though, a short story is very hard to get right. In a short story, you really are obliged to try and make sure that everything is as economical as possible. So it's a very different practice from writing a novel. A novel is making something big and cumbersome and complex and having to keep all the various elements woven together. Whereas with a short story, you might be focusing on just one thread. But if you're focusing on just one thread, you can make sure that you get it as tight and taut and as colourful as possible. But what I most of all cherish as a reader, and what I'm trying to contribute to in a small way as a writer, is a celebration of the diversity of the form, and the way in which the form can really just about do anything. Once you've established the rules that you're going to be working in that short story, you can really go anywhere with it. Your only obligation is to be true in the deeper sense, in the philosophical sense. Finding the voice of a narrative is, in many ways, for me at least, the first way in, or the first way towards it. So I'm writing a story for the moment where the main character is a trainer of priests, but of priests in a very strange church. And I didn't know how to approach this story until I worked out who was telling it. The moment I knew who was telling it, then there was a certain kind of rather tendentious priest-like manner to it, which both allows you into that world, because the voice, if it's a first-person narrative in particular, the voice is also of a character, the person to whom the story is happening, or who's creating the story. But also, sometimes the voice can lead you down a blind alley. You can spend your whole time listening to someone speaking in a very civilized way about something actually pretty horrible. So the voice and narration are both, of course, the obvious ways into narrative when you're writing or whether you're reading, but they're also the ways in which the narrative can throw up all kinds of traps and blinds and the kind of the puzzle that sometimes a narrative can be, that you're trying to work out. Part of the game of it, to try and work out what's going on sometimes, if a voice, for instance, is a little disingenuous, is one of the pleasures of reading, it seems to me. Short story writers in the UK who I'd really recommend, I've mentioned David Constantine of Constantine, not sure how to pronounce his name. I mentioned Helen Simpson, who really specialises in the form. I would suggest Bernard McClaverty, great writer from Northern Ireland, who lives in Glasgow, a fellow Glaswegian A.L. Kennedy, particularly her early stories, which I think are really quite diverse, and there's a kind of playfulness, even though her world vision is very dark. Ali Smith, another very good short story writer. There's a kind of buoyancy to her prose, which I always enjoy. Toby Litt actually is a short story writer after my own heart, in one sense, that he really writes in lots of different forms. He'll move through time and space, and will do all kind. Is not particularly preoccupied with writing the sort of naturalistic slice of life short story, which I think still dominates.